Hello everyone, it's your boy Lukael and welcome back to the channel. So as you probably know, last week was our final episode of Echoes of the Eyes, which is really bittersweet because I really love this game, and so I'm kind of sad that I'm done with it now. But I'm not quite ready to say goodbye to Outer Wilds yet. There is one final thing I want to do with you guys, and it's to watch the Noclip documentary. This is something that a lot of you mentioned in my comments and recommended I do to get a better understanding of what this game, what the game is about, how it came to be. It's something I'm really interested to see because throughout the playthrough, very often I would wonder oh, I wonder how they thought of this, I wonder how they made this. Clearly the developers are masters of their craft, so I'm really interested to see what led to the creation of this game and how they made some of the mechanics that are part of it. So I will be watching the documentary in full, and I'll just pause the video whenever I have some thoughts that I want to share. I would just like to ask one thing of you, and it's obviously Noclip made this documentary and I'm kind of just leeching off their work right now. So if you're watching this video, please also click the link in the description to go and watch their video, give them the view, because it's not fair that I get views for a documentary that they put out on their channel. So give them a view, give a like to their video, because I'm sure they deserve it and I don't want to just profit off their work on my channel. So thank you so much for joining me again today, guys, and without further ado, let's jump right in. So here we go. I'm not really familiar with Noclip. I don't think I've watched any of their... I might have watched their Dishonored documentary.
Hello there, traveler. Please, come, sit down, rest your weary legs, grab a marshmallow. I've got a story to tell.
This is cute.
Today we take a look at the design of Outer Wilds, an award-winning critical hit which has been slowly building a cult following since its release in
That's
May
us, we're the cult, guys.
This is really a game that's best played without knowing anything about it. So at a certain point, we're going to hit pause and let those of you who have yet to experience Outer Wilds an opportunity to get off. But before we get to that
arguably,
stage,
you shouldn't even be watching this.
Time we
period.
talked about the unique origins of this game.
Outer Wilds was designed by a small
about this.
studio in Los Angeles called Mobius Digital Games, but years before, it started out as a student project. Alex Beecham was completing his master's thesis at the University of Southern California. His thesis project would be a game that attempted to break new design ground, while pulling in several...
Sorry, I'm going to be interrupting this a bunch. How interesting to see this early prototype. You can kind of see already stuff that would end up in the final game. You've got the oxygen, you got fuel, this weird alien shape, which obviously turned out to be very different, and then you got telescope, ship, these different symbols, stop relative to target, which of course would become match velocity, which is a much better way of saying it. So yeah, a bunch of you had mentioned in my comments that this started as a student project, which I think is really interesting.
disparate ideas from some old student
Also, does this have subtitles? It does, so I will put the subtitles on.
prototypes.
Ah, the cute little art. Look at the ship.
Make a game where you're exploring a world as it changes over time in really dramatic ways, just to get away from the idea that game environments are these static things. It works well with space exploration, of course. I wanted to make something where you fly a spaceship.
You can see the transparent version of Timberheart and all the structures inside of it. But yeah, a world that changes over time. If you remember, throughout my playthrough, I kept referencing Zelda Majora's Mask, because back in the day on the N64, that was kind of revolutionary. Sorry, I'm so trouble pronouncing some of these words. Because the world would just evolve over the 3 days, and I know the 3-day cycle was kind of a controversial decision, but I absolutely loved it. It was so interesting how, okay, if you come at a certain moment, they weren't big changes to the world, certainly not as big as in this game, but it was so interesting being oh, well, if you come here past this moment, then this isn't there anymore. I remember how to get to the ranch, there was this big boulder blocking the path, and then if you went there in the first few days of the cycle, the boulder was blocking your path, and the only way to access the ranch was to get there on the final day, and that's the only time when the boulder was gone you could explore the ranch until you got the big bomb to explode it first. And so they were just small things, but it made the world feel a lot more alive. I'm really curious to see if Zelda, and specifically Majora's Mask, will be referenced in this at any point in this video? Because that's kind of like the main game I think of when it comes to a lot of the mechanics in this game.
Ship around, and to get to that feeling of it's super, it's dangerous. You really shouldn't be in space.
All the
really
wooden
want it to be
textures.
Newtonian flight mechanics, where you're like just drifting with your ship and the planets are hurtling around the sun. And then the other part of the really core part of the thesis was the idea that make a game where the only reason for players to explore is to sort of satiate their own curiosity.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you know me by now a little bit, like I'm a huge fan of like non-violent games, and it's not really that I have like that much against violence. It's just that there's like an oversaturation of games where the only way you have to interact with the world is through like violence and like attacking enemies and killing enemies and like fighting other players and stuff like that. And these games can be a lot of fun, of course. It's just like it represents such a huge proportion of the games that are out there, when like there's so many more interesting ways to interact with the world, and like there's so many more elements to the human experience. And so that's why I'm always kind of recommending like non-violent games and like sharing like the wholesome games account, because in recent years indie games have really picked up the slack when it comes to games that like explore different themes than just like fighting and a war. And again, nothing really against these types of games, it's just that there's so many of them, and there's so many other ideas that are unexplored. What he says here really speaks to me, because the idea of exploring a world just because of your own curiosity, that sounds like way more appealing to me. And it's definitely one of the big reasons why I play games, is like to explore these creative worlds that like these developers come up with. And that's something I really loved about Outer Wilds. Like you really got that, like they present this universe to you and it really tickles your curiosity right at the beginning. You're like, oh, I want to go there, I want to go there, because like as soon as you wake up, everything is right there in front of you,
It is inspired by this part in the Wind Waker where there's this like
There's Zelda.
photographer, and he has an art gallery. And you can talk to him about the paintings he's put up on the wall, and they're all actual photos taken from real locations in the game.
Yeah.
'Cause,
I remember that too.
You're like, wow, I wonder what this weird statue is. And he will like tell you where he took the photo. And so if you're curious, you can go check it out. But the game isn't telling you to do that.
It's so great that he mentions that. Okay, so I would say my two favorite Zeldas are Majora's Mask and Wind Waker. That's another thing that Wind Waker had that was really cool, is like that sense of exploration of just like, which of course Breath of the Wild took to like another level, but at the time Wind Waker was kind of like the first to do that. Well, I mean, you can explore in every Zelda, but Wind Waker was like really about exploring this big open world. And that was something I really loved too in Wind Waker. You see these photos on the wall and you're like some strange structure or like a photo of like a weird place, and you really don't know what it's about, but it entices you to eventually find it and figure out what it's about. And like, yeah, I just love that.
Outer Wilds in some ways was a response to Skyward Sword.
Interesting.
Because I'm a huge Zelda fan, and
of course,
Skyward Sword is emblematic of just all of the things that I just pain me to see the Zelda series doing. And it goes with the space exploration theme, where we wanted to make a space exploration game where the reason you're exploring space is to learn about the world and to gain knowledge, and not like to conquer planets.
Okay, so a lot of people do like Skyward Sword, and it's kind of a controversial title. I personally didn't really like it. Like, there's a lot of things you can like about it. Like, the music's really good, and like the visuals are alright. And some of the dungeons are good, but the big letdown in Skyward Sword was like they had this huge sky to explore, and then like you explore it and there's like nothing. It's completely empty. There's like one island that has like the tavern on it, and like one island that has like the clown minigame. And then everything else is like nothing. Like there's this chest there and there, but like it was so disappointing, because the concept of like exploring the skies is one of my favorites. It's one of the big reasons why like Gravity Rush is one of my favorite games, and all these games where you explore the skies I think are really cool. Because of Skyward Sword, I thought, okay, well, they've done it once, so we're never gonna see that concept explored again, which I thought was so disappointing. But now we're with Tears of the Kingdom, they're getting like a second chance to explore that theme of like islands in the sky, so I'm really excited, and I hope this time they do it justice.
Our ideal version of real-world space exploration, more in the vein of 2001 Apollo 13. The things we learned at USC was like the value of playtesting, the fact that no matter what you do, you're going to put it in front of somebody and it's going to break immediately. I went there along with Loan Bernot, who was the other designer on Outer Wilds. We were in the same class together. Our favorite classes, I know, for us were the ones that kind of let you do it, like you do a project like thesis prep, you kind of go off and do something maybe on a prompt, but then you all get together and you sort of talk about and critique each other's projects.
Sorry, just one last thing about that. I love space and astronomy and like all those themes. And for a long time in gaming, the only games where you could explore space, just like he says, it was more about like conquering planet and like fighting other spaceships. And again, that can be fun, but for me, the really fun aspect is like exploration, you know? That's why I was so excited when they announced No Man's Sky. And I'm probably not alone here that really was excited about No Man's Sky, and because I was like, oh, a huge universe that you get to just like explore, and it's not about fighting, it's not about killing all the creatures, it was about like discovering new planets, exploring, cataloging all these new like plants and animals, and like for me that was like a dream, exploring this universe. And just like, for example, in Metroid Prime, which is a good time to talk about because Metroid Prime just released like a remastered version. One of my favorite parts of Metroid Prime was like, you don't meet any characters, you don't talk to anyone in that game, but because you can scan everything in the environment, you get to learn through like what you scan about the structures and the enemies, and like you learn through scanning everything. And that was like my favorite part of Metroid Prime. And so when they announced No Man's Sky, I was like, oh, No Man's Sky is going to be just like that. You're going to get to scan everything and learn. Unfortunately, No Man's Sky was kind of a letdown on release, and I know they've added like a shit ton of new features since. Like, it's not even the same game anymore. But for me, like, I was never really able to get into it because of that like initial disappointment where like they didn't deliver on a lot of things they promised. But also the core issue for me is because it's a procedural world. It's like procedurally generated. You're never really gonna find anything that's like that interesting because everything is random, and so it really pales in comparison to a world like Outer Wilds where like every element of the world is handcrafted. It's, of course, it's always gonna be more interesting, and that's so it's like a little unfair to compare them, but yeah. I actually kind of studied to work in game myself, but it was more like on the art aspect. I have considered a few times going into like game design like my friend Joe did. It must be really exciting to like come up with ideas and discuss them with your friends and like try and come up with these interesting just ideas. Oh my god, we're only 3 minutes in. I've been like talking for 20 minutes. I was like, oh, this is gonna be a fun little video. It's like 1 hour long, and here I am just fucking talking nonstop. I'm sorry.
We had a class at the USC, the Master's Interactive Media Master's program. It was called World Building. I don't even remember what the assignment prompt. We just had to like build a thing, build a world or whatever. And it's just like, I wonder if I can like make a spaceship that flies in Unity. Was sort of, and I got it working. It's just like a little like physics box. You walk inside of it and walk around, go to a cockpit, and like lift off.
Look at that
and
little
fly around,
early
just like a
version.
terrain height
Oh my
map.
god.
What would spherical planets like Mario Galaxy style, but maybe a bit bigger in first person be like? And I made a planet that was bombarded by meteors and broke apart, and a bunch of asteroids with mushrooms on them, and a lighthouse in the fog with these big anglerfish. And then in the thesis prep, we had this prompt called do something with the uncertainty principle. And that led to this prototype of there's the cabin and all these trees, and they would move when you looked away and just sort of shift around. And then there was this other project where you flew a bunch of these little model rockets and then had to get into a big rocket. And the idea was that once you've played, even though
it's so I don't mean to interrupt him. It's just so cool seeing like this early version of the game. It looks like a fucking like PlayStation 2 game, of course, because it's like a really early prototype, but it's just so cool to see. So they basically had all these different ideas, like something about, oh, what if things moved around? What if we could land on like this planet? And so they meshed all these ideas together, right? I'm glad you mentioned Mario Galaxy, because that's kind of like another game that comes to mind when you start Outer Wilds, because like just the scale of everything is just so small.
it's all virtual. Once you've played with like the small version of it, the real version feels dangerous. And so that was like just a one-off thing. There was one where you threw a probe and had a video. So just like all these different ideas that sort of just got duct taped together. And then the final one I think that really mattered was this was because the point of this class was to sort of figure out what we wanted to do with our thesis. And I just pretty much couldn't let that spaceship from the previous class go, even though it was sort of like silly. It's just like we're supposed to be doing stuff that like kind of pushes the medium or whatever. And I'm just like, I just want to play with the spaceship.
You sure fucking did.
But one of my colleagues, Simon Wiscombe, was like, you should make
Early
an emotional prototype.
Dark Bramble.
Because I was struggling with sort of like, what is this going to be? And so instead of doing all this mechanical stuff, I made this quick prototype where you roast a marshmallow over a fire and then you're on a little planet and the sun explodes. and you just sort of sit there, and it's like a fireworks show. It was like very rough, but it was still like kind of pretty. And then, you know, all the planets went out one by one, and then finally it hits you. At the end of Thesis, we had the solar system. We had the planets conceptually as they are now. Some of them changed somewhat, but that's more or less the version that was at IGF in 2015.
2015, so that's when it started.
Excellence in design goes to Outer Wilds.
Oh, wow, so they won a prize that early.
So when we started Outer Wilds, we just wanted to make something where the only point of exploring was to learn more about the world, and there would be no objectives, there would be no missions.
Just one more thing about the concept of exploring the world and learning about it. This is something I mentioned in my Last of Us 2 playthrough. Of course, Last of Us, you know, it's about the story, it's about the characters, it's about fighting these zombies. But for me, like the most fun part, well, not the most fun, because I did enjoy the story and everything else, but one of the more interesting stuff was all these parts where you're just kind of like exploring the ruins of this world that's like post-apocalypse. And then you find all these things. You'll find like a coloring book, or like a teddy bear, or like a photo of like a family that used to live there. And then like, you know, just all these things where you're kind of piecing together what happened to this world. And I kept thinking, if someone made a game just like this, where you don't even fight any zombies or you don't fight any enemies, it's just like you alone in like this post-apocalyptic world, and it's just about kind of exploring and piecing together like what happened to this world, that would be really interesting. And there's probably like a game out there that's kind of like this, that like the idea of like, yeah, exploring like a post-apocalyptic world and piecing together what happened to it, which is like kind of what Outer Wilds is, because like you get to learn what happened to the Nomai in the past, and like you don't really know at first. All you know is that they're gone, but you don't know why, you don't know how it happened, and you, through playing the game, you kind of piece it together. And so I wish someone would make like a zombie game without zombies, where just like after the fact, and you get to learn and kind of piece together like what happened. Maybe you're like a visitor from another planet and you just land on like this destroyed world, you know, so, like something out of Wall-E, you know, and then you're just finding all these artifacts and like you dust them off and you're like, oh, okay, so this tells me like this. And if you have any game recommendations about something like that, I would love to hear it.
And we just weren't sure people would be into it. So thank you for being curious to explore this janky world we created.
Little team of nerds.
And a big thanks to the USC Games program, the Laguna College of Art and Design, and Atlantic University College. Clearly could not have done it without any of them.
I remember sitting at GDC, because I was at GDC at IGF that year, and I like saw Outer Wilds winning
Art
the
Director
in Design Award, and I was just like, this game doesn't look very good. I'm like, what's up with this weird student project winning all these awards? I could make better art than that. And so then when I heard about the job, I was like, I could make better art than that. Well, I guess I'll play the like alpha build that's free on the internet.
Look at that.
And then it was 4
just
in the
has the
morning,
one big crater
and I was trying
inside.
to get to the center of Dark Bramble.
Quantum
like,
Moon.
Okay, I have to work on this game. And then 2 weeks later, I moved here and worked on it.
Wow.
All right, the 2015 Seamus McNally Grand Prize goes to Outer Wilds.
So they were winning all these prizes and the game wasn't even out yet. It was just like a prototype and they were winning prizes for the prototype. That really speaks to like how great the concept was.
Thank you so much. This is insane, and I'm just tremendously grateful that
The team's growing.
and for all of their hard work, all of our crazy players and people who traded stories on the internet. Thank you for exploring and just everything. Thank you.
So at this point, the game was playable. I think it was a Kickstarter, right? I think it was like crowdfunded or something like that. So because you see the names of these backers in the museum, so I assumed it was like crowdfunded. I wonder how much was in the game at this point, like in this early version.
Usually a story like this would end when somebody won an award, but the timeline of Outer Wilds doesn't exactly follow a straight path. Winning the IGF did change everything for Alex. Suddenly he found himself at the helm of a game that a bunch of people wanted to fund and publish. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, so let's rewind.
After he'd left school, Alex went to work on Project Spark in Seattle, but had returned to LA to work at a new studio founded by his former classmate Loan and a surprising benefactor. Actor and producer Masaoka was interested in starting a video game studio.
Oh, I know this
Before
guy
his
from
breakthrough
Heroes.
role in Heroes,
Yeah.
he had worked at ILM, creating visual effects for movies, including the Star Wars prequels.
Really?
He had approached the head of the department at USC about hiring one of their students. Loan was recommended, and the two founded Mobius.
Wow, I had no
He's
idea.
always been, a very creative person, and video games were always a big part of his life. I know he was a huge World of Warcraft player. Like, he cares very much about the team itself and our work culture and the way we collaborate and that sort of stuff. So it's been really great.
In the early days, Mobius worked on mobile games like Terra Chroma and Beacon 38, and after a few months in Seattle, Alex moved back to join the team. His side project, Outer Wilds, wasn't part of the Mobius portfolio, but after his success at IGF, it had made sense for the entire team to focus on.
I mean, if you're gonna win
Alex signed
prizes
a
on
deal
your
with Massey
prototype.
to bring it in-house. They hired Wesley as art director and attempted to secure more funding by being the first game to launch a FIG campaign. The original idea was to give them an extra year to polish this version of the game and to get it out the door. But this loop didn't exactly go according to plan. During this year,
rarely
they
does.
were approached by Annapurna about publishing the game, but Annapurna didn't want a flipped student project. They wanted the best possible version of Outer Wilds. So after a year of work, most of the art had to be redone, but this extra time also allowed much of the more interesting elements of story and world building to be added to the game.
Early on, there was the idea for the structure of the game was that we're going to have these 4 major secret locations. They were each going to answer a major question about the world that we were going to try to get players curious about, and then everything else in the world was going to point to those. And each curiosity, I think, was going to have about 3 sort of connecting clues. The idea was the clues would point to each other and also point to the curiosity and have the clues. And that structure's like
I
sort
just
of
love
still
seeing
there,
this, seeing
but
this
we
early
added
footage.
a bunch of other like clues pointing to clues.
Look at the
pointing to,
little
it got more
hands.
complicated.
And yeah, that's kind of the genius of Outer Wilds, is like you find one thing and then and that's like the genius of the logs and the rumor mode and how everything is connected, and it shows that visually to you. So like even if you start thinking like, oh, it feels like everything is connected, you get to actually see it. And so you'll find one place and it'll mention something like, oh, the quantum moon and like what happened in the sun station, and so you're like, what is that? And like it plants all these seeds in your mind of like things that you need to explore, which is like genius. And it also ensures that no matter what order you discover things, it's going to point you in the right direction no matter what.
Friends, we've reached a fork in the road. If you have yet to play Outer Wilds, then
Why
this
are you
is
even
your
here?
opportunity to get off.
Hit subscribe, smash that like button, close your browser, and boot up your favorite video game machine. We're going to try and skirt around solutions and some of those bigger reveals, but as a general rule, we're entering the spoiler dimension here, so you've been warned.
Pretty much everything in
Ready?
this game is a spoiler, honestly,
All right.
because everything is so much better if you
Let's meet
discover
the
it
planets.
yourself.
I do remember it was early in the
It was
thesis
early
year.
museum.
I wish I had a picture of it, but I just remember like there was a whiteboard, and I just like started drawing just ideas on the whiteboard, and then just circling like 5 or 6 of them. And one was
wonder what the
hourglass
other
twins.
ideas
One
were.
was just like a bunch of thorns stuck together. And Brittle Hollow was sort of from that world building assignment, like meteors hitting a planet that breaks apart. One was
Devil's
a gas
Furnace.
giant, but just like conceptually, not like the way it is in the game. Oh, and then a comet, just because we're like,
The
elliptical
Nomad.
orbits are cool. It'll look cool on the map. Let's throw a comet in. Maybe if it gets near the sun, we can do something with heat.
The joke we always make about Outer Wilds is it's the game you're not supposed to make. Because like the way you do nice lighting in games is by static objects that don't move. Everything in Outer Wilds is always moving. The way you like make games is on a grid in Maya. Everything in Outer Wilds is on a sphere. Any like thing you expect out of game development, we just kind of had to throw away and figure it out.
But it shows how you can make such amazing things if you just like think outside the box and break the mold and like try new things. Because like just one example I'll give you is movie trailers. Movie trailers are always exactly the same. Like it feels like they're all edited by the same person. And it always bothers me. Like you go in the movie theater and like you get all these trailers for upcoming movies, and like they always use the same beats, same kind of music. It's always like big reveal, little scene, then it continues, like music stops. It's always exactly the same, and like it makes them so, they all just mesh together. It's so boring. But like once in a while you'll see like a trailer that kind of breaks the mold a little bit. Like one that comes to mind is the trailer for Red Eye. If you've seen that movie, it's kind of like this thriller. The trailer they made for that movie is like, it starts playing this like nice little music, and it shows the girl and the boy, and it's like, oh, it sets up the movie like it's this nice romantic comedy, and then only at the very end it starts playing like some ominous music, and you're like, oh, okay, so there's like some creepy shit here.
So are you heading home?
Yeah, trying. Hi, that's actually my seat.
You're kidding. You're not kidding. The name's Jackson.
Lisa. So what do you do?
As fate would have it, my business is all about you. You tell the flight attendant and your dad dies.
I was like, oh, at least like it's different than the trailers you usually get. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent, but all this to say, if you break apart from like the way that everyone is doing things, that's when like, yeah, you might do something bad, but you might also stumble into something like really amazing, just like they did.
And so each planet had like its own weird problems to solve, where it's like, you know, we think we figured out how to make the terrain on Timber Hearth, and then you go to the Hourglass Twins and it just doesn't work at all.
When Wesley applied for the job at
he mentioned lighting. Getting the lighting right in this game must have been so hard, because as he says, all the light sources are always moving, and so it must have been a real puzzle trying to figure out the lighting.
Mobius, he had a few things going for him. He had worked on a number of large projects, including EverQuest, Microsoft Flight, and HoloLens. But before he worked in game development, Wesley spent his youth growing up in the Santa Cruz Mountains on a campground surrounded by redwoods. So when it came to creating striking visuals for each of the planets, he knew exactly where to pull inspiration from.
Early on, we decided to reference national parks. Timber Hearth is a combination of Yellowstone and Sequoia National Park, and a little bit of Mount Rainier too, because on the surface you kind of have like,
great idea.
Trees. Brittle Hollow, we looked at like Greenland and Iceland, like the basalt rock stuff, which at the time there was like no games that did that, and then every game that's come out in the last 10 years has had that environment in it. Giant's Deep is probably the least based on an actual park. It's sort of loosely inspired by like the Santa Cruz like beach cliffs where I grew up.
And then our friend Dark Bramble.
You know, it's your friendly neighborhood plant.
You know.
The stage was set. Mobius had established its solar system. 6 unique worlds locked in a celestial fire circle the player would dance again and again. Each of these worlds was designed to be unique, and so each of them was a unique design challenge. The clock is ticking here, folks, but I still think we have enough time to take a trip around the solar system.
Do you think they do anything special at 22 minutes mark?
The first one we did after the Fig campaign was Timber Hearth. We worked on the village, which shouldn't have been the first thing that we did.
Look at this. It looks like a village you'd find in like Zelda. It's so... I love these like basic graphics.
It's one of the most complex areas in the game. I think we remade the village about 6 times throughout development. The village was sort of like we would keep coming back around to it every time we would improve the art style. It's like, all right, how can we make the village better again?
And the layout of the village on Timber Hearth is also very interesting, because they start you in this one location and then you can explore, but it kind of like funnels you up to the observatory, which is like your final stop, and then finally back down to the bonfire where you can actually start your adventure. And so this is like level design, right? They have to funnel you on the right path without feeling like they're holding your hand, and also while still making the village feel like natural layout and not like a tour that you're taking through like an amusement park, you know? But like you're naturally gonna go through it in a certain order, and then like, you know, all the way to the observatory, and like it's well done.
We need to like fix all these things because playtests would show that people weren't
basic
finding
art
tutorials.
There were a lot of problems with that version of the village, but people also just weren't excited to go into space, because everyone they were talking to was like, why would you do that? Why would you go explore the cosmos? Really early on, they were like kind of antagonistic about the idea of going into space. It was like, okay, we're gonna make, the player's gonna be the one who's like excited to go into space, and everyone else is like, don't do it. Like, oh, this is having the opposite effect. And so Kelsey and I talked and came up with the idea of, okay, you're the newest astronaut in the space program, your village has a space program, people actually want to do this stuff. It's a bit quirky, but we're gonna get you excited about space by having everyone else on some level be excited about space.
The way they did it in the game is pretty interesting because they basically just, everyone's really casual about it. They're just like, oh yeah, you're going to space, cool, cool, cool. It's just like taking your first ride on a bicycle or like getting your first car. They're like, oh, you're getting your first car today? Cool, cool. Well, tell me how it goes, you know? They're so casual about it, even though the universe is all these unknown things to them. And I also just realized that like the text that you see in the village is just like plain English. The Harthians just have like regular English language, which I guess, like, it's not that weird, but when you think how the Nomai have like their unique language and the strangers and inhabitants also, it kind of makes it weird that like the Arthurians just have regular English, but it would make things really hard for the player otherwise. So
the last version of the writing for Hornfels, who is he's the person who gives you the launch code, and he's also the only mandatory conversation in the entire game. And you know, initially we were trying things like giving the player the option to ask what their mission was or where to go next, and then he would go like, yeah, it's up to you. And what we ended up with instead was we reversed it, you as a player. What do you want to do next? That ended up really working, like surprisingly well. And because you know, it's a selection, we gave them a few ideas too, right? It's like if they didn't know what to do, we still gave like, yeah, there are some things you could be interested in.
Another thing I think is really great about the game is the names of the planets that they came up with. Like they're kind of poetic and like evocative of what they represent, and like giants deep. I don't know, it just really sparks the imagination. You're like, is there a giant in there? Like it's deep, so like is there, you think of the ocean's depths and like, I don't know, I really love the names they came up with for these planets.
Giant's Deep was originally just going to be a gas giant. It wasn't going to have an ocean, but we wanted there to be islands like floating in the sky. But we were like, how are we going to get islands, like why, like how are we going to get that to work physics-wise, also like just conceptually? And we're like, well, maybe there are 2 layers of fluids of different densities. It's like, well, one could just be water. Oh, it's an ocean planet. Then we're going to toss them up with tornadoes because we can do that.
Look how dark it was in that early version.
My
Look at the big furnace in the ship.
Just because I love storms. Like I was really into tornado movies when I was a kid and that kind of stuff. So getting to make these giant tornadoes was a lot of fun for me.
We have the fluid system, which is like pretty simple, but it's a student project. You just sort of take the things you have and just reuse them over and over again. And so we use the fluid system for the geysers, for the sand funnel on Hourglass Twins, for the water on Giant's Deep, for the tornadoes on Giant's Deep. It's just us reusing like the same idea. We're just gonna like take a force and fling something to sort of lean into the idea that it's just all these pieces moving around and you're just caught in the storm.
Yeah, Dark Bramble is sort of a weird case. The challenges there were very different. The biggest challenge was just the scale of Dark Bramble. Because when you fly in, like, it's covered in fog, so you can't tell, but those environments, like, they're just huge in comparison to anywhere else in the solar system.
It was largely motivated that we wanted at least one of the planets to be a zero-G environment.
I saw someone posting a picture of like what Dark Bramble looks like on the inside without the fog, and it's like really jarring to look at, and you're like, oh, okay, so that's what it looks like. That kind of makes sense, but it's like so weird to see.
And obviously there was something very large that we had to hide inside Dark Bramble. The planets in the game are like not that big, and we just embrace the idea of these sort of dimensional pockets that you fly through because it works really well with the lights.
Dark Bramble has ice around it. It's like, all right, easy,
pockets.
just make some ice. Well, it needs to look specifically like Dark Bramble ice, so when you see it on a different planet, you'd be like, hey, that's some stuff from Dark Bramble. I can't just make it look like ice because I used the ice-looking ice over here on like
It's true, it's very specific
on, like,
looking ice on
Brittle
Dark Bramble.
Hollow or stuff like that. So it's like, okay, how can I make this ice still look like ice, but look different from this other ice?
And it worked. Every time you see ice from Dark Bramble, you're like, oh, that must be from Dark Bramble.
A binary planet seemed cool, and just the idea that something could transfer from one to the other over, because we're just looking for ways that we can change things over time, ideally in a way that is like easy for us. And I remember originally it was like, oh, it could be like water flowing between the two. And then sand just couldn't resist the idea that of you getting closed into these space, just knowing you're like, oh my god, I'm trapped and I'm going to die a horrible death. Just
happened to me.
To pass up. In the final release, the tech and the art teams did some really cool stuff to make it look more complicated than a sphere getting bigger and a sphere getting smaller, but that's like all it is.
You know, we think we figured out how to make the terrain on Timber Hearth, and you go to the Hourglass Twins and it just doesn't work at all. And so we had to come up with a different strategy there. And so each planet had that. And for the Hourglass Twins, it was that it's full of caves. And so, as I mentioned before, you have two different curvatures at the different heights of a planet. And for the Ember Twin, you have caves that slope from one of those to the other. So not only do you have two different curvatures, but you have a ramp that has to match one curvature at the top of the ramp and a different curvature at the bottom of the ramp. And then, you know, you got to put all the props in there and make it feel good to move on. So it's just like a compoundingly difficult thing to do.
Plus, it's just cool how, like, it's like a really simple thing, but I always enjoy when games kind of like touch on every type of biome there are. And it's something that most games, like I know especially like most JRPGs or like a lot of Japanese games kind of do that, where they'll have a world where you get like the ice world, you get like the fire world, the forest world, and like, yeah, it's kind of like the standard thing, but I always find it kind of charming. So I think it's cool how even like this, with the few number of planets they have in Outer Wilds, they were able to do that. Like Timber Hearth is like, it's kind of the forest planet, but it's also kind of like the winter planet, and then you've got like the sand desert planet. I don't know, it's something I always enjoy. Like he said, like, oh, at first it was just water going between the planets, but then like, why not make it sand? And then like all of a sudden you're changing the dynamic completely by making it like this other type of material. It changes the look, like the visual look of the planet, and it changes the mechanic because you can't stand on water, but you can stand on sand. I wonder how they came up with that name, the Interloper.
We didn't have it in the alpha, but we had the idea for it melting. And then Lowen was the one who did the first pass on it. And then at some point, I went and did a pass on the surface and came up with the idea, because the comet wasn't that fun to navigate, just moving around on it, because there's not that much there.
With the Interloper, there is one thing I will say is like, and if you watched my playthrough, you saw how confused I got, because I waited on the planet until it got close to the sun. And like I was waiting for the ice to open, and the ice does open each time, but then it closes up, which doesn't really make sense. Like I kind of wish if you stay on it in the first pass near the sun, you can see the ice crack a little bit, so you get like this, oh okay, so it is reacting to the sun. And then if you stay on it or like come back the next time it's next to the sun, then you see, then it opens up and then you can go inside, but it has to be like at the end of the cycle. I think that would have been maybe like a little more interesting than what they did, where like it just opens up completely both times and then it closes up, because it's like, why would it close up? Like how's the eyes just, you know, I don't know, it's a small nitpick.
And it's like, well, what if the ice, if you can just like slide on the ice, like is that too goofy? Like is that tonally dissonant with what you learn in the comet?
They brush on these very quickly.
We often referred to as the final boss for the art team was Brittle Hollow, because it's the biggest planet because it has both an outside and an inside surface.
It was really hard to explore Brittle Hollow. Like that one or two episodes, I kept thinking I'd missed shit because the layout is so complex.
It's one of the biggest planets just in terms of diameter, and then it's one of the most complex in terms of level design and pathing and, you know, all these different things that need to go there, like 2 giant Nomai cities. It was like the hardest for every discipline of the game, design, tech, art, like for everyone it was the final boss.
Does not surprise me.
Brittle Hollow was originally like had a molten core. There was no black hole. And the pieces, I believe the pieces, like when they got hit, they were gonna get jettisoned away from the planet. And at some point it's just like, this doesn't actually make any sense. Like why are they drifting away from gravity? Like, okay, can we make them fall in? How would we, like where are they gonna go? There's gonna like, okay, there's a black hole and it spits them out over here. I remember prototyping a version of that and then like changing my mind and being like, no, this is too much. It's like too crazy and weird, and like it's not as colorful because like the black hole's all dark. Let's just like go back to the molten core and we'll add geysers that like from the core that heat water, and the geysers shoot these pieces of the crust off into space. And then at some point it was just like, nope, the black hole thing was cool, let's go back to that. And then weirdly the geysers ended up on Timber Hearth, and the idea of pieces getting thrown into space ended up on Giant's Deep.
What he just said like occurs in every game you've ever played, and it's so crazy to think about how about like how close some things are to not happening, and like sometimes someone will have an idea and they're just like, nah, let's not do that, and like it could have been, and it sometimes came really close to happening, and then like it just takes one person to be on the team to be like, no, let's not do that, let's do this instead, and like sometimes they'll come up with like something that's way better. With the black hole, is such a cool idea, and like it led to so many other parts of the story. And then you can recycle these things on like other
it was like hard
planets.
to tune the pieces falling at the right time because it's a simulation. They have hit points and they get hit by meteors and they fall, and it's not scripted in the sense of like it happens in a specific pattern.
It's interesting. I thought maybe the Brittle Hollow breaking apart was scripted, like for some parts too, because it feels like it's always the same parts falling in at the same times. Like Tower of Quantum Knowledge always falls in pretty late, so interesting. I didn't think it was random. I did think it was scripted.
Took a long time for design to like lock it, and then art had to go in and, you know, just fill it out. And there's just so many rocks on that planet, just thousands and thousands of rocks. And we put all those there by hand. It's not like procedural. So we make sure that you can see in the right places and that it feels good to walk on and all of that. And then with that planet, you also have to make sure that like in between the crevices, you know, you can't fall through in some places, but you can fall through in others where you're supposed to.
They're playing the music at 20 minutes. You can't see my timer right now, but we're at 20 minutes 57. They're playing the end times music at the same time you would hear in the game, which is a really clever touch.
Pretty much any challenge that you can have, we did have there. And there's all the normal Outer Wilds problems of you have curved surfaces with different curvature based on where you are on the planet, which is not something that a lot of games have to deal with.
It was supposed to be a bit overwhelming at first, right? Because you arrive in a city and it adds to the whole feeling of wonder when you arrive in a new place and it's like, oh my god, there's so much. Each district is like one piece of one.
Because there was so much.
The first thing you would find when entering the district, like another one of the district, you arrive and there's a big waterfall that sort of like frames three wide, we call them Nomai whiteboards, but there's only one of them has text on it. So you're like, okay, I probably need to find the other two somewhere.
Hurry up, you're running out of time.
The first thing players see or the first thing player experience should give them a question.
Hurry up.
And then like the natural impulse is like if the player has a question in their mind, hopefully by then they go, okay, let me answer that question.
Falling in the black hole was so fucking jarring the first time. This is happening at the exact same time it would in the game. So how did this concept, the concept of like the time loop, come to be? Are they gonna show the video in reverse? Oh my god, they are! I love it. So cheeky.
Mobius had made an entire solar system for the player to explore, but this solar system didn't have any explicit objectives, mission markers, or fast travel. So how did they let the player know where to go? And more importantly, how did they let players know when they had accidentally found something important?
We didn't want players to go look behind every tree and every rock and in every nook and cranny. So what he made sure of was that detail would always only be where content was. So like if you look at Timberhearth, you have like vast expanse of grass on the surface and it's just grass, nothing there. And then each of the actual craters with content have incredible visual density of detail.
It was like a challenge of like trying to...
Very clever, because just like he says, if the whole planet of Timberhearth was as detailed as like that crater where the village is, you would spend hours just like trying to see if there's like stuff on there, and like it's very smart how they did this, where like in places where there's nothing to see, you can tell right away, like you're not tempted to explore at all because it's so plain looking. And that must have been a very fine line where you still want it to look like it can be too plain because it's still like a planet and there's still areas there, but like you want it to be plain enough where the player can tell at a glance, okay, there's nothing there.
Just stick as close to the gray box as possible, because like every time it's like, oh, I'll put like a nice little tree over here, or like a pot, or like some sort of thing, and then like the designers will look at it and be like, oh, like actually there's like this very specific like viewpoint. You need to be able to see this clue that's like across this chasm. So if you put too much stuff though, you block the view, and it's like, oh god.
Lighting as well sometimes, just like if you keep everything relatively dark or like same tones, and then put a bright blue or something light there, and it's like immediately you notice that. Audio as well, like there's the traveling music when you're traveling around, and then there's music when you're in places with content. So like if you enter a Nomai rune, suddenly piano starts coming in and you hear the music coming in. And so it's all these little subtle clue.
It shows how great they are at this, because like just like you said, visual cues and like audio cues and like using every tool in your toolbox to guide the player, and it shows how much they understood these elements of game design.
If you don't have that instinct, there's something here, there's not something here. Because of the way we structured the game, it is very easy to hide things. We wanted certain paths to be the first path you use, just from a narrative perspective. It was a nicer
That's a really hard thing to do.
But then we wanted quick shortcuts.
Because players will do whatever the fuck they want, and like a lot of you mentioned in the comments on my playthrough, like how sometimes you would go a certain way first, and so like you missed all kinds of stuff. And I was pretty lucky in my own playthrough, especially in the DLC, where I ran into things in like the correct order for things to like fall into place and make sense in my brain. But a lot of you guys mentioned like finding like the bugs in the system early, and then like it kind of ruins the rest of the experience a little bit. It's a really tricky thing to do, to guide the player on a certain path, but still keep everything open.
To get to back to these places. And we're all worried about how would we hide these, and like had all these, and it's like, no, it's because we trained the players to not look behind any nook and cranny. We learned a lot of things in relationship to player, the way people perceive things and the way, you know, players naturally go about it. Some of it was frustrating, like the natural impulse to see text as lore was definitely something we had to fight against. The natural impulse that most players have to need a goal. Hopefully more and more games do away with that, and so I'm hoping that slowly
making your own goals.
Easier actually to do the sort of things we did in Outer Wilds, as people get more like willing to set their own goals and get a bit more proactive in trying to read things as a way to progress.
Outer Wilds is such a complex design challenge that it's easy to forget the technical complexity of the project. While Alex and Lohan led the design team, the game's engineering was led by another duo. Technical artist Logan Verhoef had graduated CS Games at US Santa Cruz and was a year behind Alex and Lohan at USC, while software engineer Jeffrey Yu had graduated USC as an aerospace engineer with a minor in computer science.
So technical art is writing shaders that run on the GPUs. So like as well as setting up particle systems and setting up lighting and that sort of thing. So I did a bunch of math that makes the singularities look like they do. I did a bunch of math that made our lighting work the way it does. A lot of tools work. Half the gameplay code.
Other than the designers, it's just the two of us doing all the code. So
the fact it's such a small team is so
This
crazy.
is Timber Hearth. This is what it actually looks like in our scene. Here's like the moon over here.
So how do you like work on this, considering it's like a sphere? Like how do you get in and
I mean, if you just learn how to sort of work like that. So we're actually looking straight up right now, but you just because flying around still works the same.
Right.
You just learn to sort of work in this weird way. Sometimes people like...
It's true, it must be so weird to work on, because like usually you're on a grid, and so you're always looking at things like, okay, now I'm upright, now I'm looking there. But because everything was on a sphere, they had to always be like turning the world around to try and look at it from like different angles, and like that's so weird. But then of course when they play test it, their character would be affected by the gravity and stuff. But also a little thing I noticed was, like, I knew there was this big crater on the back of the moon, but seeing it there in the correct lighting, you really see how massive that crater is, and it kind of makes you appreciate how when that piece of dark bramble, or like the planet that was there before, crashed into the moon, probably the moon kind of saved Timberheart from like maybe not being destroyed, but like maybe destroying their civilization, because like that's a huge crater. Damn.
Work like this or something or that. Anytime I'm working on the underside of a planet, I have to do this sort of kick flip here.
Yeah.
And now right and left is reversed.
Oh no.
But I remember that I'm in this mode, so I'm just automatically like, okay.
Each planet is a rigid body, like a physically simulated like object moving through space affected by forces. And so is everything else, like everything in the game is. You know, if we were a different game,
is the craziest
we could get away
part to
with
me.
saying like, you know what, we'll just fudge it. We'll just like, you know, fake it when you're on this planet and it'll look right. But because Outer Wilds is a game about simulation and about truth and systems, that was top of my list for things I didn't want to do, was fake anything. That is one of those things where we try to just like tighten it. We reduce the number of colliders on the planet. We reduce the complexity of them while still having it be a surface you can walk around on. So like if this coffee cup were a physics object, you know, the rendering mesh has all this detail and curvature and all this in it. Physics could probably just be like a 8-sided cylinder, and you know, that's enough. You can fly around, hit the wall, bounce off, roll around.
Maybe even make it just, you know, a 4-sided one.
Yeah, if you don't need it to roll, 4-sided, if the player's just walking into it. So going in and finding places to cut back here and trim a little bit there is good.
For me, that's definitely the most impressive part of the game technically, is like how it's a full system simulation that's always in movement, and like everything is moving in relation to each other, and like it's like they said, like we didn't cheat. We could have faked it. We're like, oh, it looks like it's affected by the system, but it's not really. But it's like, no, they actually made it where everything works in relation to the other. It's crazy. Like that's the really impressive technical achievement of this game.
A lot of people wonder like, hey, are they like faking all the caves inside planets?
Yeah, it could be like you get teleported somewhere else,
It's
but no.
literally 0G because it's in the middle of the planet.
Yes.
And that was my theory as well, is when you go in that zero G cave, I was like, oh, there's no gravity because you're at the center of the planet, which actually made me wonder about like, is there gravity at the center of our planet on Earth? Because like I know gravity is kind of affected by massive objects in space, and also from spinning. Like if you're spinning like a spaceship, then you'll have gravity on the outskirts, like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, you know? So like what if you could dig all the way down to the core of the Earth? Would there be gravity there? Good question. I'm not a big enough science nerd to have the answer to that question, but when I was playing it, that was my theory, was like I'm probably at the center of Timberheart right now. Plus it was like a big area, so it kind of had to be.
Yeah, because you're no longer being attracted like the sum of all the mass. Now you're there and all the mass is around you. And so it's all pulling on you equally in each direction. So this is actually physically correct.
If you leave a planet, we do a bunch of stuff to optimize it while you're not there. We switch to like a super low res version of the planet, you know, handmade by like Lara or someone else.
That's what I assumed.
Yeah, turn off a bunch of the collision, so we aren't updating all this collision math. While
otherwise you couldn't run this game at all.
Suspend a bunch of scripts and a bunch of objects. The issue is that if you leave your ship on a planet and you go somewhere else, it still needs to collide with stuff.
We need colliders there. So
and furthermore, for this philosophy of like the truth in the system, if there's a geyser going off and it should be hitting that ship, it needs to keep hitting that ship. If the sand level is rising, it's like...
And because of the scout, because you can leave the scout on like a planet, take a photo of it, and if you leave, you still need to be able to like take photos of this thing that's like all the way on the other side of the system. So they have to reduce like the amount of scripts and stuff that's happening when you're not looking at it, when you're not on there, so that the game can run okay. But then it needs to still affect your ship, and it needs to still be able to be like taken a photo of with your scout. And also a number of places in the game will allow you to like fast travel instantly from one location to the next, so you can't have like any pop-in. It can't look like the area is loading in around you. It needs to always be there, just like you never left.
Like trapped underneath something, it needs to respond to that.
Right.
That means we have to keep all the collision and scripts running when the ship is left on a planet.
So surrounding ships
when you
and
leave
the
a probe
scout.
on a planet, you need to be able to take snapshots of it from across the solar system, which means all the rendering, all the visuals need to be turned on.
And if you have it right next to a geyser, the geyser has to go off.
That's crazy. It also explains the scale of the system. Like, it's kind of small, but that's the only way they could have made this game work.
The worst thing you can possibly do in that game is have the scout, yourself, and the ship all on different planets. And if you really want to go hard, I put the Nomai shuttle on a 4th. But like, don't do that. It's
You're gonna crash the game.
We have to render at least some of what's going on. Like if you leave your ship on Brittle Hollow and a piece breaks, your ship needs to go through the black hole and get spit out the white hole. If you leave it on Ash Twin, we need your ship to get sucked up by the sand funnel, even if you're halfway across, you got teleported to Giant's Deep or something. And that was really important to us. We tried really, really hard, and the tech team kind of worked really hard to make sure we didn't lose the sense that this is a world that doesn't revolve around you. Because that was one of the main design pillars. It's like it's not supposed to feel like a player-centric game. The world doesn't stop simulating just because you're elsewhere, right?
It's something that's really hard to achieve, but it's always great when games do that, is like when they create a world and they actually make you believe that the world would revolve even if you weren't there. Like, it's not about the player. And like some games kind of do stuff like that. Like I'm playing Elden Ring right now, and you know, in Elden Ring you'll kind of walk into a battle between two groups of enemies and you're like, oh okay, that doesn't really have anything to do with me, and you can just be on your way, and like this stuff is just happening there regardless of you. And it's kind of rare. It's always a great little touch when the game can make you believe, okay, this stuff would be happening even if you weren't there. Because like in real life, it's a hard pill to swallow for some people, but the world does not revolve around you, and so neither should games, you know? Of course they do because you're the player, but it shouldn't look like they do.
At one point we thought about making this an achievement, but then thought better of it.
Oh, no, we didn't think better of it. Annapurna got miffed at us because one of our suggested achievements was called Critical Performance Hit, and it was leave your ship on one planet and your probe on another and go to a third. And they were like, you cannot have an achievement be the player crashing their PlayStation or Xbox. Like,
which,
no,
to be fair, rarely
are you
happens
insane?
naturally.
And we're like, yes,
we're
but
purposely making people get
good
frame
point.
drops.
Yeah, it's like, don't encourage people to do this. And we're like, okay, you're right.
That's
but
funny though.
Not as fun.
Another thing is I played the game on Epic because that's just kind of where the sale was, so that's where I got it. But Epic doesn't have achievements, so I didn't see any of the achievements in the game, unfortunately. I don't really know what they are.
Like everything in this world is moving, right?
Like I know one of the achievements is like flying into Giant's Deep so fast that you actually get through the current. And some people told me like you can do that. I think they knew because there's an achievement to do that. And there's also one to like have all the planets kind of align where you can hear like the full song of like all the travelers like align, which I don't think ever happened to me naturally in the game, but I think that's also an achievement.
I guess the sun is maybe the only object that's not technically
moving. It is too, because the way we with video games, you got to keep the camera near the center of the world's coordinate space.
Okay.
Or you start running into floating point error and everything starts kind of jittering. And so we have to keep the player near the mathematical origin of the world. And the way we do that in this game, a lot of games sort of like you reach a threshold and they like reload the next zone, right? But because ours, everything's moving relative to each other, what I ended up doing back when it was a student project is just every time we apply a force to the player, we just apply an opposite force to every physics object in the world that's currently simulating. And it doesn't actually really do anything to performance because we're already doing that, right? We're already applying forces to every object because everything's moving. It's just another number on top of numbers. So when you jump in Outer Wilds, technically every planet's jumping out from under you, and you're more or less not moving. So it works, and we haven't changed it.
There's some like cosmic horror about that or something. Yeah. There's some like science, that's like, it makes me recoil a little bit hearing that.
I love it that because we're always like, oh yeah, and the player's not the center of the world, but technically you are. Like literally the center of the world at all times.
From a technical standpoint, at least. Do they talk
like
about
the best
DLC
sci-fi, Outer Wilds marries the technical with the emotional, and a large part of this heavy lifting is
It's a great quote. Like the best sci-fi marries technical with the emotional. That is where the best sci-fi is when like it has a great emotional core.
Is done by the narrative and musical score.
It's what makes Mass Effect great.
The story, Alex turned to his lifelong collaborator, his sister Kelsey. As children, they made silly plays together and stop-motion mock-ups of the Star Wars films starring Beanie Babies. Kelsey had been writing her entire life and had often used a tangential form of note-taking which inspired the Nomai whiteboards. I was eager to talk to her about the wonderful personalization of the Nomai,
Such a
using
great
these
concept.
interplanetary
These
telephone logs.
spinning
But unfortunately,
logs.
she doesn't live in the same state as the studio, so we did the next best thing and aimed our scout across the country at North Carolina.
Some of them are like literally just meeting notes. It's like, here's what we decided, and someone else is
This
like,
is a
oh yeah,
fun
by the way,
documentary.
so-and-so wants to do this other thing. So having kind of a rationale behind why these things are getting written down and explained, to me just kind of added a sense of logic to what was going on. Yeah, a little less difficult to explain things because they're talking to each other. They need, everyone to understand what's going on. For how much Outer Wilds is a very narrative-driven game, I actually really love very character-driven writing, and a lot of my writing is like that. It's very intensely about characters and about their evolutions, and
I would say that's maybe like the weakest, not the weakest, but it's maybe the part that's hardest to suspend your disbelief in this world, other than like the fact that they live in like one village on a planet. But it's kind of like all the stuff you find is very kind of conveniently, it's very convenient exposition. It's like you don't find any text of Nomai just saying like how their day is going, or like what they had for dinner, or like what announcing that they had a child, or like, everything you find is kind of about the mysteries in the game that you're exploring, which of course, like I'm not saying it shouldn't have been like that. It had to be like that for the game to make sense, but like it is like the little thing where you're like, okay, I'm playing a game. I'm only finding what's relevant to the game I'm playing. Like, you know what I mean?
I think that's kind of what the difference, I felt like that was what was going to be the difference between having an interesting story with interesting characters versus the more tropey ancient alien civilization.
But like is being said here, they did do it well, where they did give like character and personality to all these Nomai that are talking to each other in the logs. Like you can tell, you can follow like little threads of like, oh, this character, like, oh, this Nomai is in love with this Nomai, and like they're kind of flirting, and then like this one is very like worried about this, and they did have like these little story threads that you could pick up on, which was nice.
Civilization who was here before us and is smarter than we are. What essentially the player is doing is they're tracing the same journey that the Nomai took, and then eventually, spoiler alert, toward the end of the game, you're finishing that journey. And to really feel like you were connecting with the Nomai, I don't think people really connect with like a civilization as a whole. So I think it necessarily had to be very character driven, which was terrifying because you don't see these characters. And also I had a very small chunk of text to work with. And most of it had to be dedicated toward quickly advancing a complex story, and then also getting across your clues. And then of course the clues work as, here's what's happened, here's kind of the next piece, here's where you should go to continue chronologically in the story, and then there's like a little piece that directs usually backward of like, here's where I'd go to check out where this piece came from if you want to trace it the opposite direction chronologically. And then it usually connects into other things depending on who the characters are in that particular, because I use certain characters are attached to certain plot lines. So that when that character is present, typically that's kind of the signifier that plot line is coming into play and intersecting with this other one.
Absolutely. And also just the visual of it, I think is so brilliant. The visual of the Nomai logs, because it's unique. It's like a new thing. It's like a new thing that I'd never seen in any other game or movie, or like this. I guess the closest you could say is the aliens language in Arrival, the movie, where it's like they talk in these circles, and I was like, oh, that's great. That like finally we're seeing, because like most aliens that you find in science fiction media, they just talk in like, it'll be weird little symbols, but it basically follow the same pattern that we do. It's like, okay, well, it's left to right, and it's like these straight lines of text, and it's just like different symbols, but it's basically the same concept of language as we have. But then in Arrival, they did instead like they speak in these like circle. They had to decipher what these circles meant, and then here it's like these spirals and like they branch from each other. It's just really creative.
How do we communicate this idea to players in a way that is like interesting narratively? Makes sense why the Nomai would even be talking about this. It is also like, you know, telling you, you read it and you're like, okay, I get what this text is actually communicating. And we just did just so many revisions of all of this and so many play tests.
This is how you used to read text in the game. Oh wow! Except it's not
Is
like
it busted?
Well, probably.
They were busted at one point, yeah.
Or you have to pull out your. No, you have to pull out your translator.
Oh my gosh, I coded this.
Okay.
Oh wow!
It does that faster now.
That's yeah.
From a design perspective,
So it's just
a
like
certain
kind of
amount
little
minimalism
holograms.
was actually advantageous. Like knowledge is the only reward. So you learning, you know, things is the only thing you get. You know, it's really.
And just like I said earlier, I wish more games did that. But like they made a world that's so interesting where the reward is not like you're not getting stronger, you're not like getting more gold, you're not like leveling up or getting a stronger weapon. Like the reward is you're learning more, you're getting more knowledge, you're getting to understand the world more. And I wish more games did that.
Really hard to do because players see text as lore that is not necessarily actionable.
But see, in here, and just like you said, it's not just about learning the lore of the world you're in, it's also affecting how you interact with it, which is why games are such an interesting medium that is so rarely used to its full potential. And I would say Outer Wilds definitely used the game medium to its full potential, which is why it's one of the fucking, I'm sure you would agree, one of the best games ever made, in my opinion.
We really had to set the example of never having lore-only text, which also applies to other things, to have lore-only pieces of level design or part of the environment. So through design, we actually had to be pretty minimalist because we had to make sure everything was actionable and everything was pointing to the thing it helped you to do.
So originally, the ship log we knew we were going to need because we didn't want people to have to take paper notes. We originally only had the
which could have been fun. Like it would have been a real pain in the ass to keep track of everything. It would have been a lot of work. But I do kind of like when games like force you to take like paper notes. It's kind of fun. It takes you back to like an older time in gaming where we didn't really have guides or logs in games. You really just had to take notes on paper, and it was fun in a way.
Solar system view, where it's sort of the planets in a row. We added the rumor mode with the lines, the detective board, like a year before launch. Because
wow, that
we just
late.
had some playtests. People just weren't understanding the structure of the game, like how to go about investigating. Let's just show them how we think about it, and like let's just put our design docs into the game. Pretty much is what we did. We needed ways to get people curious about things, and pointing your telescope at a distant planet and hearing a sound just seemed like a no. You know, it's like, well, yeah, of course people are going to want to go check that out. You can go to like NASA's website, and there are these recordings of like sounds from Saturn where they sort of interpret data they've recorded. And there's just, we knew we wanted to have these travelers around the solar system on each planet, sort of as the trail guide or the travel guides for each planet. And it's like, okay, they each play an instrument, and wouldn't it be cool if you could just pick up the music in sort of a whimsical fashion?
It's a great way to get you started in the game. Like I just recently watched my friend Audrey play, and like she was kind of lost at first because like there's so much stuff, and the only hint I was like, well, why don't you start by just visiting the travelers, you know? And that's kind of what they intended the travelers to be, is like it's this starting point, because you can find them from any location thanks to the music, and then when you talk to them they can tell you a little bit about the planet. They're like, oh well, here's what's worth visiting here. It just gets you started, but it's also like this nice unifying thread, which of course gets, spoiler alert, at the end of the game. It really brings the narrative together at the very end. It's a really clever way to direct the player at the beginning and just have this music playing.
Back in the very beginning stages, we were talking about having the different travelers on different planets, and then I kind of crafted the concept with Alex of having them like actually all playing the same tune, not having them play different songs. Like I was.
And honestly, I didn't really pick up on that at the very beginning because, like, for example, Gabro's flute just sounds so like, it doesn't even sound like it's playing any melody. It's like, you know. It's only if you maybe like accidentally line them up that you can tell, oh, they're playing the same music.
It was like we should have them play together, so it's kind of grasp this approach where like no matter where you're at, like the world can be like a smaller place through music, and like you can be connected that way. Hopefully captivated that message by having them all apart, but really they're all in sync, like in a certain way through this like tune that's really like a premonition to the end of the game. Really, it was based on like thinking about sitting around a campfire and something that's simple and easy to play but memorable. So like it kind of gets caught in your head. So I mean, really, the main theme is only like a couple bars long. It's about the joy of life and like the journey and like all the existential stuff that it gets involved towards the end of the game. Like, and it's sort of this theme that starts off like when you hear it first, like it sounds kind of happy, but over time, like it becomes this melancholy and like reflective piece.
It really does.
So that's kind of what I was aiming for, like this bittersweet, like nostalgic campfire tune. Really, like I want it to be like when music is playing, something important is happening. It's not just kind of like it's important for it to stand out when it needs to, and when there doesn't need to be music, there shouldn't be. And especially like when you get into the desolation of space, I think it helps make it a little bit more fearful in areas where there's no music, because you really do feel like you're a little bit more alone, because all you're hearing is like your breathing and stuff.
Oh, it definitely works, because like there's so many places in the game where all you get is the silence, and so it puts you on edge. Like it was really scary at first, because like you're just in these areas where like you know you're alone, there's no one else there, it's silent, you hear your breathing. So they were very smart about where to play music, where to play very kind of low-key ambient music, and then where to pick it up where you're like, okay, there's something going on here, there's something to find.
That way people notice the music and like it actually is meaningful rather than always just being around. The second thing I ever wrote was the main title. So what I did was I went back and I recorded myself playing banjo with my 7 years ago self at the very end, just because I thought it would be cool to like literally wrap the game up like when you first play it. Like it's like me playing at the beginning when we started and then at the very end.
Wow.
It's like multi-track banjo, and one of them is me from
meta.
7 years ago, and one of them is me from right before the game came out. It's like
That's
May.
so crazy.
Yeah, that's what I was like, I have to do it, I have to do it.
It's so meta. Andrew did
We
like
talked to the team at
amazing
Mobius
job.
about design for over 2 days, but as you know, time is precious, so we can't fit it all in the doc. So if you're interested in watching some bonus scenes, you can do so on our Patreon for the price of a few bags of marshmallows. Speaking of paywalls, Outer Wilds had what you might consider to be an untraditional launch. For PC, it would be an Epic Game Store exclusive, while on consoles, it would launch as part of Xbox Game Pass. We asked the development team about the reasons for both of these partnerships, and they said those decisions were made by Massey and their publisher, Annapurna.
It's never really
The game
up to
launched
the
in May of
developers.
2019 and has been slowly building positive word of mouth as the studio continues to tinker on it.
The Ash Twin project has gone through several redesigns as the final puzzle has stumped a number of players, while the game was brought to PlayStation 4 in October of 2019.
Yes, I would like to publicly apologize for the Ash Twin project puzzle. We are still working.
It's so interesting that they bring this up, because if you remember, I also brought that up, how the Ashwin project, just getting inside of it is kind of like the one thing I found was like, it's a little cryptic. It's both like too easy to find and like really hard to find. It's this very weird thing that must have varied wildly from one player to the next. After I brought that up, it was the thing most people commented on in my comments was like, oh yeah, about the Ashwin project. Like, I still feel like there would probably be a way to make it where getting inside of it depends on like knowledge, and it already does. I know it's about like the towers and like all that stuff, but I don't know, this idea of walking into the sand never really felt natural to me. I'm like really surprised I even tried to do it. So I'm glad he's bringing it up here as something that they also struggled with, and there's probably still like a better way they could have done it, but
working on that actually. Yeah, we keep that was one where you just didn't have enough long form playtests. We did do long form playtests, and we knew that was an issue. It's not as easy as just going in and like just telling people the answer, because we don't want to invalidate all of the other clues. So we're trying some new stuff with our new patch actually. That's coming out pretty soon.
Interesting.
We'll see. We're watching people play, streamers online, still taking playtest notes.
Wow. It's interesting how they're still kind of patching things in the game, and it's something that a lot of people brought up in my comments. People in the comments would be like, oh, that's not how it was when I played it. Like, they've changed that since, like, especially in the DLC. They've apparently made things like a little easier to navigate. It is interesting how they're still kind of touching up the game and trying to improve it, but there's also a point where you have to be like, okay, well, the game is over now. We need to stop touching it. It needs to be finished, That must be a very difficult decision to make for them.
Really happy, with Game Pass. It has really brought so many people that may not have played the game, and now that they have, they're just enthusiastic evangelists for us. So
we sure are. Everyone who's played this game, I think.
Because it's a game that's so easy to spoil, you try to say as little as possible, which makes it hard to sell.
Yeah.
So,
which actually, when you go on the store page for this game, I think the store page description even mentions that the system is on a time loop, which I wish they didn't say that in the description. Like, you find that out really early anyways, so like, why even spoil that great little moment? I mean, you don't know the nature of the time loop, but like, when I first played it, I didn't know there was a time loop. It really caught me by surprise, because I didn't read the store description. Like, my friend just bought the game for me, and then I launched it, and I just started playing it really knowing nothing about it. So I think it's kind of a shame that the store description tells you there's a time loop.
Like, a game that is in itself a mystery will definitely benefit from a subscription service like that, because it's like, people are like, they won't buy a mystery, but they may try out a mystery and then be like, oh my god, you have to try this.
I remember one of my favorite moments when we first showed the game off at PAX East. Someone was playing on Brittle Hollow, and they like parked their ship, and they went down and explored for a while, and then they were looking over and they saw a piece falling, and then their ship just sort of like tumbled off the top of the fragment and like bounced off as it was falling into the black hole. And they're like, my ship! And they were like chasing after it as it's like falling into this black hole, and I was like, all right, we made a cool game.
There's so many moments
time on
like
it.
this.
Like, several people on the team spent like basically a year of our lives working on that ship, and we had all these like grand ideas of like, oh, we want it to break apart, and we want all the like little gadgets to be actually useful. And like in the middle of development, when you're just,
is that a thing in the game? The temperature? Does that work? Like this thermometer that tells you what the temperature is? Oh, I'll have to go back in and check that out. It might be something they scrapped though. I don't know if they actually got it to work, or if that was like one idea they had.
Just like trying to ship the game, it's like, oh, there's no way, like,
ship
it's just
the
gonna
game.
be a box that moves around. Like, I guess we'll make it work. And then when we actually like managed to get like the damage in there, we managed to get the destructibility in there, and just the more little details we could add, it just really feels right. And
which, the fact that your ship can get damaged and like repaired, it doesn't really add that much to the experience, but I think it's still a cool little thing. It makes you like kind of get attached to it, and you're like, oh no, I need to repair it. Like, it's my ship,
seeing people fall in love with the ship and like have adventures where the gravity crystal breaks and they're floating around hurtling towards the sun and they're trying to repair things. And
I didn't know the gravity crystal.
It's just so exciting for me every time I see something like that.
I mean, when you're a musician and a composer, you want to be listened to, and you want to be heard, and like have your voice like speak a story through your musical voice. And finally that has happened on a large scale where people are noticing my work. So it's like finally stuff is paying off after all this time. The community behind Outer Wilds is like really passionate about the music too,
because it's so great.
The game. So that's been like incredible to have people reach out and like tell me how much the music means to them, or that.
It's great because it's not just good music in a bubble that you hear and you're like, oh, that's good music. It's great because of how much it matches the atmosphere of the different planets and the different areas and the different moods. I think it's really one of the best examples of music setting the correct tone and ambience for what they're going for, because just from hearing the music, and maybe even especially in the DLC, the music they play really sets the tone. It simply would not be the same game without its music, which you can say about a lot of the games really, but this one especially, I think.
That they've been listening to it like nonstop, and I don't know, it's really like, it feels really good.
Good for you, man. Again, this is happening at the 44-minute mark because the second cycle is over.
All right, it's time we address the elephant in the room. There's probably a bunch of you who clicked on this video expecting us to be talking about something else. A different game set in space that came out in 2019 and was developed by a studio based in Los Angeles.
What game is that?
I think we were just in a class and a few of us were brainstorming. We were just tossing around ideas, words that felt good. I think I remember at one point we were like cosmic wilderness. And then we're like, all right, well wilds is shorter, that, and then outer wilds somehow, like, we just, you kind of slot the words together eventually, and just like, outer wilds, yeah, all right. And it stuck.
Do you remember when you first saw that there was another game coming out that had a...
Okay, so they're talking about Outer Worlds.
Because it was almost exactly a year ago at the Game Awards.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Actually, no, we had seen it, they'd filed a patent or like a copyright. We had seen the Outer Worlds. I remember looking at that being like, wow, I really hope they hear about our game and don't do that. But the Game Awards, we saw that trailer and it's just like, all right.
Which, to be honest, Outer Worlds would have been a great name for this game. Maybe even, I don't know, would it be better? They're about the same, I'd say, but it's kind of weird that two games have the same name like that. Which, if you've watched Mapocalypse playthrough of Outer Wilds, he made that joke where he starts the first episode with just this game's title screen, which I thought was really funny.
All right, cool. The Outer Worlds and Outer Wilds together in 2019. They obviously are a bigger studio than we are and have a bigger kind of reach, and I think ultimately it's probably good for us because just people talk about it. Like, wait, these aren't the same game? What is happening?
Have you ever met any of the folks from Obsidian? They're pretty close. They're in Irvine.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Oh, man. We've talked about that we should do some sort of cross-promotional thing with them. Right. Just just anything. Or like April Fools, we just actually switch our names.
Could have been funny.
I think Logan mentioned that the other day. I was just like, oh, it'd be so good though.
like the Outer Bundle.
Yeah, it's been a strong year for Outer games.
Outer Bundle would be nice.
We've explored the origin of this game, the design of its planets, how the team guided players, the technical challenges, and the emotional core of the game. But Outer Wilds is more than a sum of its parts. It's the type of game that leaves you with a feeling that can't be explained. It has to be experienced.
Agreed.
And for the team at Mobius Digital, the years-long cycle from award-winning thesis project to full retail release has been an experience all on its own.
I think the nicest thing is, even though working on the project has been super crazy, we haven't really had to crunch, and we all work reasonable hours. I think it's the fact that it's just a nice chill atmosphere.
We try to keep the work environment good and safe and make sure people don't overwork, but to some extent we did not as good of work on that side for the leads. For me, Alex, and Wesley, we both had to deal with a lot of stress.
Of course.
So it was difficult, but
it was worth it.
To finally see the results, to hear from people. This dad who played the game with their, I think, 9 or 10-year-old kid, and who told us that at the end the kid wanted to become an astronaut.
Wow.
I was just melting in my chair reading this,
Yeah, they made this life-changing experience for so many people. Thousands of us now have played this game, so it was well worth the stress. I'm sure they would agree.
When we released it and we started to get feedback back in, just seeing the people who understood what we were trying to do. It's people like the game for the reasons why we made it, and they got the story we were trying to tell.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud that we told a story that could only be told through video games.
Absolutely.
Because we tried really hard. We wanted to make something that couldn't have been made any other way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that there's sort of this just connection with everyone who plays the game, and we added something meaningful to the lives of the people who played it is just really humbling, but an incredible feeling.
Hell yeah. Wow. So there you have it. This was a great little documentary. I'm really glad I watched it. Very interesting. Of course, there's so much more that I'd love to know. Like, I'd love to talk to these developers about like how they came up with these ideas and like the technical challenges. And so like you could really have like a 10-hour documentary for this game. I'm glad I got to get this little glimpse into the creative process. I hope that my own comments were a little bit interesting. I just felt like talking some more about Outer Wilds, you know? But alas, I think we're finally at the end of my Outer Wilds adventure for good. If you have anything to say about the stuff I brought up, please leave a comment below, and I'll be trying to reply to every comment and engage in some discussion with you guys, because I would love to talk some more about Outer Wilds. Like, this game is really special to me because my friend recommended it to me, because it's kind of like the first playthrough to do well on my channel, and it allowed me to connect to like hundreds of you who've subscribed to the channel since I started playing this game, and so it's always gonna hold a special place in my heart. Even if someday I somehow reach like 10,000 or, you know, subscribers, I don't know if that's ever gonna happen, but I'm always gonna hold a special place in my heart for you, my loyal Outer Wilds watchers. So yeah, feel free to discuss the game more in the comments. I'll certainly be replying to comments and taking part in the discussion. Share your stories and all that stuff. As for the future of the channel, I will be playing Firewatch next week, which is the game that most of you voted for in the poll that I posted on the channel. So Firewatch will be next, and then I'll be jumping into Season 2 of The Walking Dead. Of course, I still have Elden Ring going on. I want to give a big thank you to all of you who came to the channel because of Outer Wilds, but have since kind of checked out my other playthroughs. It's really appreciated. A lot of you have been recommending specifically Subnautica and also Return of the Obra Dinn, and there are two games that I will be playing. Maybe not like right away, but maybe in like a couple games I'll be getting to those. And then I'll also be playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom on release. So yeah, I hope you'll be interested in watching these future videos. If you would like me to post more videos, the best way you can help me is by, of course, subscribing. You can support me on my Patreon, and another big thing you could do is just share my channel with like friends or people you think would be interested in watching, because the more people watch my channel, the faster I can monetize, and by monetize I can start posting more videos, and then you'll get to watch me play more games. So regardless, all of your support is really appreciated. So thank you so much for watching this video with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.